I was raised just east of Dayton, Ohio. Went to church every Sunday, every Wednesday night, every Sunday night. My parents were wonderful Christians. My father was a musician that played just about every instrument known to man. They called him the one-man band. So I grew up around music all my life. When I was 4 years old, my sister Ruth picked me up and put me on top of the upright piano in our living room. She said, "I'm going to teach you some songs, and I'm going to play for you." My feet were dangling down there in front of her, and my sister began to play and teach me a lot of the songs that I'm still singing today. I'll never forget those days. I remember sitting in the church in the middle of Dayton, Ohio. I always sat on the second pew. Don't ask me why I had to sit on the second pew, but my parents were on the other side of the pew. But I did learn that I could entertain just about everybody in that congregation from the second pew of that church in Dayton, Ohio. I remember sitting there and listening to my sister Ruth as she would sing those beautiful songs. One in particular, "I don't know about tomorrow, I just live from day to day." She would sing that again and again and again, and it was such a blessing. She was 15, I was, of course, 4. She graduated from high school, went off to college, and did what most girls do, met a young man and married him, and he was a minister. They were called to go to California to minister, and so that's what they did. And then they were called to Salem, Oregon. Her husband was on his way up Route 5 up to Salem, Oregon with the truck with their furniture in it. And then, for some strange reason, she blacked out, ricocheted off of the bridge into 2 trees at 65 miles an hour, and hit a little son, Ridgely Paul, a little girl 10 years old, and my sister Ruth. Their lives ended that day. I thought back to that song she would sing. "Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand." I can't tell you how much I miss her today, but even though that was a sad experience, her memory, thinking back at those days when she would sit at the piano and she would play for me, launched me into the ministry that I'm still carrying on today. Singing and acting in the Scribe. Watching my father as a child as he would play all those instruments. It was great, and I enjoyed it so very much. My brother Dave was a great inspiration for me, 7 years older than I, and we'd play church. We brought our teddy bears out, we would sit them on the couch, and just about every other day we'd get those teddy bears saved. It was a great time of church. We grew up in church. Our whole lives were about the church. At the end of the day, my parents would turn the TV off. They would take out the Bible, and my dad would read the Bible, and after we finished Bible reading, we would all kneel by the couch and we would pray. It would be my dad and then my mother. She could pray heaven and earth together. And then my oldest brother, Ernie, and my brother David and Ruth and I, we would all take turns praying. And then before we would go to sleep at night, my mother would pray with each one of us as she tucked us into bed. I'm so thankful for that kind of a life and that kind of a mother and father that would take time out of a busy day at the end of the day and say, "We're not going to watch TV tonight. We're going to pray. We're going to read the Bible." So that's the way I grew up. When I was a teenager, my mother had never worked outside the home, and at 55, she decided that I was going to go to college. And so she learned how to drive a school bus to raise the money for me to be able to go to college, and I'm so very thankful for that. A woman at 55 years old who cared enough about her young son to put him through college. And I'm very, very grateful for my mother giving me that opportunity. My mother was born in Guyman, Oklahoma. My mother was a Cherokee Indian. My father was from Birmingham, Alabama, so that made me a Native American redneck. That's what I am, but you have to be something. And so, my mother grew up on a farm, and she would tell us stories about plowing in the field. Many times she would stop the horse and kneel down underneath a tree, and she would pray. That's the way she grew up. Those were the what they called the Dust Bowl days. My parents both went through the Depression. My mother grew up in Guyman, Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl days. My grandfather was one of the founders of the Church of the Nazarene and pastored and started many of the churches throughout the Midwest. And my mother would tell me, she was such a Nazarene, she would say, "Paul, Jesus was a Nazarene." So that's all I knew growing up. And I'm very thankful for my mother and how she taught me how to pray. When I was in a revival in our church, and we had a minister who came, actually it was a Georgia peach they called her. I never heard women or anybody called fruit before, but they said, "This is a Georgia peach coming to our church, and she's going to preach," and so she did. And I felt conviction in my heart and went to the altar, and who was there praying for me that day? My mother. And so the most important times of my life, those pivotal times in my life spiritually, my mother was always there. My mother passed away just short of her 102nd birthday. She lived a good long life. She prayed for me every day, and I miss her as well. One day I'll see her. I'm glad that she could live a long life. We enjoyed her.